Welcome to the Outer Circle, Inner Stillness, conversations and reflections on the inner life, the spiritual life, the sober way of life, and how they all interact. And today I am here on the screen. We're not actually in a studio. We're actually very far apart in the country. But I am with Mary Kate Sowell. And hello, Mary Kate. How are you?
Hello. How are you? Very good. It's a
Good.
nice 70 degrees here in Texas. This is our winter. It's wonderful. So we're soaking it up.
70-degree winter.
So great.
I've got some jealous parts up here in the Pacific
Uh-huh.
Northwest where, well, it's not quite freezing. We had snow last week a little bit. It tried, and now it's raining again. So it's
Uh,
now a warm and balmy like 42. So
Toasty.
yeah. Anyway, Mary Kate, would you say a little bit about what's your corner of the world, and either where, what's you're in Texas. I'd love to hear about that.
Mhm,
But also,
mhm.
what's your corner of the counseling world, the spiritual world, the recovery world, and who are you in those senses?
Totally. Yeah. So right now I am working towards my full licensure in marriage and family therapy. Um, And so I've got just a few years of practice outside of schooling. Um, and in speaking to um, my experience with the recovery world, it's definitely minimal. I did spend about 6 months at like a crisis unit in town in Austin. So definitely working with the unhoused and folks struggling with, substance abuse disorders, and got some taste of what that looks like, and how to care for those folks, but definitely not an expert. I've definitely started to love working with my current clientele. I'm working at a group practice here in Austin that is a Christian facility. And so getting to work with people of all different Christian backgrounds, denominations, practices, and then definitely clients with all sorts of Christian identities. And so it's been really fun to start to apply some of my training from school, you know, theoretical lenses and approaches to treatment towards, okay, now how do I make this applicable and approachable for Christians, right? And I have run into um, totally different obstacles trying to, I guess, translate things into Christian language and help with folks who are feeling like this is a little woo woo, or is this, anti-Christian or anti-God to be coming to therapy. So a lot of fun.
That sounds like so much fun, and a lot of different experiences. Yeah, you've definitely gotten to see a wide range of people, which is a really valuable experience, I'd say. Um,
Yeah,
I'd be um, there's a couple of things you said that I wanna camp on a little bit, but I wonder if you could say a little bit about what is your spiritual tradition, or maybe like the very brief of your spiritual story.
totally. Yeah, that's good. So I grew up Roman Catholic. I definitely still identify with Roman Catholicism, and have now married to my husband, newlyweds, right? So we've been married almost 2 years, but
Congratulations.
he grew up, thank you. He grew up Southern Baptist. And through dating him, he taught me a lot more about my own, denomination. He taught me a lot about Catholicism, and taught me that we are on opposite ends of the spectrum there. I didn't really know there was a spectrum, but we are on opposite ends of it. And so,
Yeah.
all throughout our dating, it was just tons of debates and why do you believe this? And this is heresy and whatnot. And actually really strengthened my faith in Catholicism, but also just appreciation for what our church is lacking, and some of the ways that we have just like there's just other perspectives that can create a full wholeness of who Jesus is, and how to grow in relationship with him. He's definitely helped me learn my Bible, right? And, have some woes about the fact that I was not forced. I want to memorize scripture. And, now being an adult trying to do it, I wish I had learned when I was 5 years old, right? Some scripture. But so now we call ourselves very ecumenical, which is, our fancy word for interdenominational, and just an appreciation for, you know, all of what it means to be Christian in the ways we can, through Christian unity, really explore God more fully.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I hadn't caught that your husband was Baptist, but that is an amazing. That seems like a really interesting combination of some with some good friends who he's Eastern Orthodox and she's Catholic, and they just got married. And
Cool.
yeah, well, it was definitely a noteworthy point in their wedding, and they were like, yeah, this sort of East and West marriage doesn't happen very often.
Yeah.
So I mean, they're excited about it for a lot of reasons, but I mean, I think that
What's
was
it
one of them.
there? Did you go to their ceremony?
I did, yeah. I mean, it was an Orthodox wedding at the Orthodox
Cool.
Church. Yeah,
Okay.
and Orthodox weddings are just really amazing. Anyway, they're
I've
so
heard just some, I've never been, but I've heard some of the symbolism, and it just sounds so cool.
yeah, it's really cool. Teasers for all y'all who should still come to an Orthodox wedding sometime. So notably is that there's no vows. The bride and
Oh,
groom, they don't say anything the whole time. It's very much like the priest who's like blessing and saying prayers, and in marriage being a sacrament, it's the Lord Jesus binding these people together.
yeah.
And it's look what the Lord has done. And
Yeah.
the other really notable imagery is that the husband and wife, they're crowned. They're given actual crowns, and
Yes.
it's likened to the martyr's crown,
Mhm.
which those of us who've been married kind of get that. So,
Mhm.
uh, and lots of prayers about having kids. There's a lot of prayers about may these people have lots of kids. So,
Love
yeah,
it.
we like our kids. Um, that's really neat. Thank you for sharing some of that.
Yeah.
I
Yeah, the whole
I
crown of martyrdom is so cool. That's the part of it that I'm like, first of all, my living my princess dreams if I could have a crown, but then also the martyrdom piece, of course. Like, I've heard stories of folks that, you'll keep your crown or something and you point to it, when your spouse is like, you're like, die for me, be a martyr for me, come on. you
right.
know? So that's
Yeah,
awesome.
that is really cool. No, I was appreciating in your story too, talking around your growing up. So I'm Eastern Orthodox now, but I grew up Protestant and grew up in a
Hmm.
non-denominational church. And
Cool.
what I love about that is the particular churches I was in really loved the Bible, and
Mm,
they really, really emphasized and normalized a daily reading and a daily studying and a memorizing. And so
right.
um, I grew up reading the Bible, and by the time I hit Bible college, I'd gone through the whole thing a couple times, knew all the stories, knew a lot of like the major theological points, and
Hmm.
I confess in my grown up life, it's not a discipline I maintained really well.
Mm,
Uh, my in Orthodox prayer rule, we hit the Psalter hard, and so I'm in the Psalms all the time, and we're in the
ah,
Gospels all the time. So there's that, but there is a little part of me that's missing the feeling of like I'm actively in the Scriptures, and
yeah.
I mean I'm thankful that I remember a lot and I'm able to like make references to things just from memory. But it kind of I don't know, it almost feels like cheating a little bit because it's like you're not putting any new information or new experiences in anyway.
Yeah.
So
But
there's
that's
a
cool that it's ingrained in you, at a young age so that you can call upon it when needed for weaponry against the evil one. Like that's cool.
yeah. So and now I'm having to figure out how do I pass that on to my youngins.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
yeah. Um, one of the other things that you started to talk about, which I think makes a nice segue into what we were wanting to talk about, is this relationship between uh, Christianity, spirituality, specifically a Christian spirituality, and the world of counseling and psychology. And
Mhm.
spoiler, like, you and me, we both love the internal family systems model, and so we'll be parsing it up today, I think.
For
Um,
sure. Partsing
yeah,
it up.
yeah. But you're mentioning, I think, a real dynamic where, or I think this is what you were talking about, where sometimes within the church world, there can be a skepticism, hesitancy, or kind of concern toward all things psychological.
Mm-hmm.
And I know one time when I was like this conservative homeschooler in a small town, I was all I knew about psychology was Freud, and
Yeah.
that was kind of creepy for me at the time.
Yeah.
So like, I've since expanded my perspective a bit. But what else do you notice there in that tension?
Yeah, I mean, the lucky thing, right, is if somebody's coming into my office, they're already clearly they've overcome some obstacles to the fact of that there's enough belief in therapy, that they're here. But then, when you start going into, caring for um anxiety or caring for shame or caring for, the parts of our own system that historically we've shamed or said get rid of or pray away, or don't focus on, just point your eyes on Jesus. If you're ruminating on these things, then that's sinful. And so then when we start to like actually try to spend time with the parts of themselves, here we go with the parts language, the parts of themselves that they're ashamed of, um, that can be really tough trying to build, essentially a Christian argument for why this is not sinful, that this is Christ-like, and so that can be tough.
Yeah, yeah, there can be some tough things there. Um, I'm remembering a conversation with a Christian client I'd had recently, and he had asked a question, something to the extent of, "Is anxiety a sin?"
Hmm.
or something around like, "How do I, feeling a lot of anxiety, wanting to address it, but very much." And this particular person is very, 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 active in therapy, very, very open to the therapy,
The
the counseling
process,
world. But
yeah.
yeah, but there you could very much tell that there's a sense of, well, clinically, neurologically, I know, anxiety is this. It's something related to, cortisol, stress response, limbic system,
Very
blah blah blah.
good. Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
but St. Paul in his letter to the Philippians says, "Be anxious for nothing." And there's a sense of,
Hmm.
you kind of get the sense of anxiety as being related to the sin nature or something. And so, shouldn't I just repent of it? Shouldn't I just trust Jesus more? Shouldn't I just be praying more?
Right.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think that's where, yeah. I'm gonna drop in this other reflection that I'd written as
Please
we were
do.
talking about the relationship between psychology, spirituality, and we're gonna talk about these the spiritualizer parts.
Hmm.
So trying to figure out what that is. So Bible reference. So in the Gospel according to John the Theologian. So sandwiched between John chapter 7 and then the latter portion of John 8 is the first part of John chapter 8. So in John chapter 7, there's this long scene where Jesus eventually comes out into the temple and declares, "I am the living water," and is one of like the
Hmm.
7 great I am statements. And shortly thereafter, he's at the temple in the morning and he's declaring, "I am the light of the world." And so these are these
Yeah.
big, heavy, really weighty theological
Yeah.
statements that we, analyze and debate forever and ever. And they help us understand how to understand the Trinity and everything.
Hmm.
But in between these two moments, these really big concept moments, is this little story that's, super high drama, very intense emotions, this very physical, visceral, physical. I can't talk in the morning. But this this really embodied, potent story, and it's a story of Jesus and the Pharisees and the woman caught in adultery. And
Hmm.
for the listener who may not be familiar with the story, so essentially what it is the So there's Jesus, and then there's the Pharisees, who are the spiritual leaders of the day. And there's a whole bunch of nuance of like religion and politics, and they were
Mhm.
essentially in after various captivities and a whole lot of Jewish history. The Pharisees basically were the lifeline for the Jewish religious practices, and
Right.
they kind of held the religion together in a lot of ways. And so they are all about like, here's the law, here's the order, here's like the really meticulous attention to detail, and here's how things
Mm.
should be. And they were always challenging Jesus because I mean, for a lot of reasons, he was kind of disrupting their mode of being. And anyway, for the full story, read the Gospels. But but anyway, but in this story, so they're wanting to trap him and to
Mm.
find a way to condemn him, and so they bring to him a woman that's been caught in the act of adultery. And yes, it is notable that they don't also bring the man, but
Mm.
anyway,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
Love that side note.
Right. But so they bring her, and kind of the implication is she's like wrapped in a sheet or naked or something, and they're saying this woman was caught in adultery, and Moses, the one who's given us the law, this one that everybody reveres, says that she should be stoned. But what do you say? Because they know he has this penchant for being like extremely gracious to people.
Mhm.
And so instead of answering, what he does is he starts writing in the dirt, and it's not said specifically what he's writing, but it says that he's writing against them. And then he says to them, well, whoever of you is without sin can throw the first stone. And then as he just continues writing, they one by one walk away. And I think it's like either oldest to youngest or youngest to oldest, but like in a really particular
Mm.
order, they leave. And then when they're all gone, he says to the woman, where are your accusers? And she's like, they're gone. And he says, well, neither do I condemn you. Now go and sin no more.
Mm.
And and then he goes on to say how he's the light of the world. Uh, so so
Yeah,
so
that's so good.
so it's this very very famous story, and it's held up as one that really just emphasizes the radical, scandalous, unsettling, and even offensive love of God toward us.
Mhm.
And um, I appreciate the story from the vantage point of one who's grown up in the Christian faith and been in some form of the church for just about all of my life. And lately, I found, like I said, my final home in the Eastern Orthodox Church. For me, all growing up, I wanted to please God. I wanted to be good, which I equated with being super spiritual, which I then also equated with being a high performance, super moral public ministry figure. Uh,
Mhm.
uh, if I'm not a pastor, youth pastor, church planter, missionary, worship leader, or something, then I'm failing as a Christian. This
Right,
kind of like the
exactly.
super inner narrative. And so that obviously this created intense frustration when I got to be an adult, and I couldn't get any traction at all in launching any sort of like ministry career. Uh,
Mm.
so that was puzzling. I wanted to be righteous. I needed to be righteous, and if I wasn't, I was afraid I'd be like all of those other people who weren't as spiritual as me and who didn't take their faith as seriously as I did.
Yep.
So I would look at them and I feel good about myself because I'm better.
Right.
But then I'd also look at those who might judge to be like more spiritual than me,
Mm.
and I'd admire them, but then feel bad about myself for not being that spiritually cool. Uh,
Yeah.
and then also as I was getting older, I discovered, well, here's the issue of my own sin or sins, multiple, definitely a plethora of sins. Uh, like attitudes, behaviors, proclivities, some addiction stuff, and other things that just didn't fit into the paradigm of like conservative Christian homeschool golden boy that I'd grown up with. Uh, so there were some times in my life when these sinful behaviors, got the best of me and caused a lot of havoc in my life. Uh,
Mhm.
which those are interesting times. But there were many more times when I kept my behaviors under control, but hated life in the process. Like I've always been some sort of anxious and insecure, and more recently I've realized I've also been really angry for most of that time too about a lot of things.
Mm.
What's interesting for me though is I discovered that trying harder to be spiritual didn't actually fix anything. Reading my Bible more didn't fix me. Learning and keeping a prayer rule in the Orthodox tradition has been very, very, very good, very, very centering and stabilizing. But for years before that, prayer was this really confusing, frustrating, unpredictable
Mm.
guesswork thing. And so, and no matter how much I would like repent about a thing or confess about a thing, like I don't know, I couldn't feel close to God. I could kind of
Yeah.
keep my behaviors under control, but like the effort it took to just like hold myself under control, like not really knowing why, it was just really frustrating, and it left me feeling really angry and hollow, and
Yeah.
like, and like at one point, like almost walking away from the church because I was like, this doesn't work. It doesn't fit with life as I know it. So.
Yeah.
So now I look back and I suspect that a lot of my spiritual formation was done by a spiritualizer part, or
Oh.
um or I can maybe say this inner Pharisee a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Uh and so here's where we get to like drop into our fun conversation of
Yeah.
spiritualizers. From your perspective, Mary Kay, what's your understanding of what spiritualizer inner Pharisee part is?
Yeah. Yeah, and there's lots of types too, right? That I've encountered. Lots of different types of spiritualizer parts, and um, I notice my clients, if they've got an awareness of parts, like a part of me is thinking this, another part thinks this. Whichever one is more spiritual is typically what they'll trust, right? That one must be more aligned with God. Um, and so, but in particular, the type of spiritualizer part that I've run into, um, that I just could not figure how to help, um, was in this specific case with a couple that was going through betrayal, infidelity, and the betrayer, the wife, she just could not get good with the part of her that caused this. And the husband actually was able to have compassion and understanding. And we were doing all of the internal family systems language. They were aware of parts and self, and they were moving along with it. But whenever I would ask her to sit with or show compassion towards or interest in the part of her that was led um, outside the marriage, she just, you know, uh, and it was out of this. Um, I should just be going straight to prayer. I shouldn't be spending any time with that part of me. I shouldn't be bringing that one even to prayer. I should be focusing on the Lord, getting my mind off of it, and moving along. Um, and with this really Christian rhetoric of why that's important, pray it away, right? And prayer is enough, you know. And so I actually had to go to my supervisor with this, right? Because he's, been to seminary, or not, maybe not seminary, but he's been to definitely um, Christian education, been able to face lots of Christian clients and these types of struggles with, how do I greet the parts of me that I'm shameful about? So I said, what is the Christian argument for this? Like, I was totally stuck there. I didn't want to ask her to do something that was against her belief system. So I have to give credit where credit is due. So Carrie Williamson, my supervisor, gave this great word and brought us to the parable in Luke 10. Um, and if it's okay, I'll just read it, right? And you guys may already get where I'm going as we read this. When we think, or maybe I'll just summarize it, but we know this story, right, of the Good Samaritan. Um, and he was sharing with us, of course, this guy's getting beaten up by robbers, left for dead on the side of the road. Very shameful sight, dirty, bleeding. Who knows what he was getting himself into? And kind of, so folks are passing him by and, looking away, right? And especially priests and Levites, they were passing by. I do not associate with, right? I would not get my hands dirty. And so then we have the Samaritan, and it says, Samaritan traveler who came upon him was moved with compassion at the sight, right? And what does he do? Even before he goes and finds a place for the guy to stay, finds someone to pick him up off the side of the road. He goes straight to his wounds. And it says he approached the victim, poured oil and wine over his wounds, and bandaged them. Right. And so that time that he spent with like straight to the point, straight to the dirtiest, most wounded spots. Um, and so if we can use this image of what's a spiritualizer part, it would be those who walked on past, the priests that were meant to be focusing on things of God and Christ and praying and teaching and doing all, you being the ministers, like you were saying in your story, Moses, not to be associated with, these folks on the side of the road. But we all know who was the one that was being the neighbor, the Good Samaritan. And so this gives us an idea of maybe we don't always want to be placing all stock and trust in whichever part of us seems more spiritualized or more closer into the Christian rhetoric. That maybe the Good Samaritan actually has some good ideas here as well.
Maybe, just maybe.
Right.
Yeah, I really love that. This brings up, I think, a really crucial nuance, because when you're talking around, I was thinking about your client story and some of the sentiments that can come out of a situation like that, of like, well, shouldn't I just be going straight to Jesus? Like, shouldn't I be praying more? Shouldn't I be repenting? Like, are these not good things? And
Yeah.
the tricky thing is, yes, they are good things, and yes, we should be doing those. And yet there's this thing that happens where somehow those aren't quite enough, or there's sometimes this like missing piece that goes there. And
Yeah.
and I feel like then, and how you're interpreting the story of the Good Samaritan, it captures that sense of the need for compassion.
Mhm.
One of my other internal family systems teachers, Jenna Ramirez, she's noted in the community as well. She wrote the book Altogether You, and
Mm.
yes, I'm remembering that right. And she's very very openly Christian, and very openly interpreting the IFS model through the lens of scripture. And
Mhm.
she uses language of moving toward, or moving away.
Mhm.
And it's like the sense of, in the story, our tendency is going to be, when I have a wounded or an ugly or beat up part of me, my tendency can be to move away from it, or to
You're
just
right.
avoid it. Or maybe like move against it. Like, I've got to, like, get that away, and
Yeah.
everything. But there's also this way to just be really gentle and really curious, in what the IFS people dub the self, the core essence of a person, where I'm not intimidated by things, I'm not afraid of things, I have a lot of curiosity, a lot of compassion, and I can just say, hey, here's this, beaten up, wounded, ugly part of me, but I wonder, if I move closer, what would I see, or
Yeah.
what could be possible? And there's this move toward, to
Mm.
consider that can happen. And
Therefore, yeah.
yeah, and I think in the Good Samaritan story, there's kind of that the feeling brought in by the Samaritan. He can move toward the wounded person, and in that there's a healing that happens there.
Mm.
Kind of similarly, there's a way where Jesus and the sinful woman, he's um there's this gentleness there, where, like, it's kind of the sense of like, well, like, nothing really needs to happen. Like, y'all without sin, go ahead and do your thing. And then they're like,
Yeah.
well, we can't. Uh, so
Right. Yeah, and I think there's like a need to clarify that we're not saying grow near to your sin. Like, we're not saying hang out with the parts of you that are tempted so that you can be to tempt yourself. Like, we're not, because that's, I think what folks get into is like, okay, well, if that's the part of me that did bad things, if I hang out with them, then that means that I'm approving of what they've done, or um that I could end up being tempted and do it again. And so there's a separation we need to have. And we all say, right, hate the sin, love the sinner. And that's what we're asking for here, is not to say, you know, go be near the things that lead you to sin, but go be with the parts of you that maybe they did a behavior that wasn't helpful. Let's understand why. Let's see how we can help them so they don't have to use the same methods to be cared for. If you're meeting them there, that may be enough for them.
Mm-hmm.
So
It's a really important distinction. I mean, sin is still sin. Evil is still evil, and the harmful things we do are still harmful and should not be done, should not be condoned. But you're right. There's a distinction from here's a thing that I've done. Here's this part of me that did it, or was driven to do that, or reacted in this way. And yeah, there's a lot to be gained from knowing yourself, from knowing. So example from my life. So working through past experiences with pornography addiction and things like that, then and other things, other sexual behaviors. So I could definitely take the approach of like, well, that's just bad, and I need to keep it away,
right,
and like I hate my sexuality, I hate my body. I just
right.
like, when the thought comes up, be like, punching myself both for having the thoughts. And I know people that take these violent approaches, like, of
Yeah.
like really tormenting themselves for having a lustful thought, or having sinful thought. Um, what I've discovered for myself though is, yes, I don't want to act out on those. And I don't, because it causes damage, and I don't want to be dominated and consumed by a lust or sexual desire. I don't want that to be definitive of me. I
Right.
mean, I like sex, but but what I discover though is in having the language of here's a part. I kind of figured out. So a lot of like my sexual desire, it's related to this like really young, like high school age part of me that uh he shows up in grown-up life as wanting sexual experiences, but when upon curious reflection he discover actually what he really wants is to be seen and appreciated and like
Mm.
connected and like part of something special.
Mm.
And those are legitimate things that I can now with my adult self, I can meet those needs in legitimate ways. Like I can say like,
Totally.
let's go stand before an icon and like be with a Theotokos, be with Saint
Oh,
John or Saint
yeah.
Franciscan. So there's, I don't always do that, but like, there's a potential to say like, okay, here's this wounded, burdened part of me that has done some sinful things, and I need to be
Mhm.
careful. But there's also a way to bring healing to
Mm.
that part. And in
Mhm.
particular, in a sacramental context, be like, hey, and I'm bringing this part to the altar. I'm bringing this part to the Eucharist, and bringing this part to confession, and we're all getting healed together.
Mhm.
So, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's so good, because I think that encapsulates, right? Because the spiritualized parts in the face of sexually deviant parts or other, sinful parts, that could the the healing thing for them could be the same. The action of going and hanging out with icons or whatever. I don't know the Orthodox ways, but bringing it to prayer and spiritual practices. If it's out of this, I want to get rid of you, I'm going to pray it away. It's not. It's not hitting the mark for that sexually deviant part. But when there was time and care to go, hey, what is it that you are craving? Oh, it's connection. Oh, it's intimacy. Oh, it's to be seen. Well, this will provide you those things. And so now you have a mental shift, and the behavior that's healing for that part may be the exact same, but it's with more of a care and an awareness of what the need is, that can guide you in what you're praying about and what your intentionality is when you're going to that prayer. So the behavior may not be changing, but there's a mental shift, if that makes sense at all.
Mm-hmm. And the behavior may not be changing right away, but when we talk about planting seeds of growth to set you on this internal trajectory. Yeah, you do this internal shift, and at some
Mhm.
point, if that becomes a true thing, at some point behavior changes anyway.
Yeah.
Maybe slowly over time, usually slowly over time.
Mhm.
Um, but again, the Christian faith is not about behavior change. It's about healing. It's about whole person transformation.
Mhm.
You can't behavior change yourself into the image and likeness of God. Like
Right.
that's a conversion process throughout your whole life. So,
Right.
you know.
Yeah, and this brings me to, if I can have a spiel on this, right? Of because I've got similar story to you, absolutely, and it's this desire to get rid of parts of ourselves that are led to sin, and this, like you said, that uh, turning away and almost like trying to cut off a part of ourselves. Um, and what happens for me, and this frustration that I have, it's I have a very pious, I call it my pious part. And she's like this tall, skinny nun, and she's like, got the ruler ready to slap your wrist in class or whatever. And she can be real vicious towards my like playful, um, wants to go run around in fields and not go to sit in mass or church. And so in church, there's this anxiety that I have started to feel more and more in the past few years as this division between these two has become more and more tactile. So when I am sitting at church, I am, faced with all this anxiety out of nowhere, which of course makes my pious part even more upset because you should be feeling peace in this place. You should be joyful, and trying to really like force things upon my system. And so there was this inner turmoil I was having in church one day. And one of the readings ended up being 1 Corinthians 12 about, one body, many parts. And I was wrecked by this. Oh my gosh. Like, I've thought of that as us as individuals in a community. And that's how it is meant, right? Lots of folks, and we all have different gifts and weaknesses and strengths. But I started to have this shift of looking at it in an inward way, the parts of just my body, not the body of Christ as a whole and all the different people, but even within me and the different parts that I have. And right, for the listeners that's not aware what I'm talking about with these one body, many parts passage, um, I can read some snippets of it if that's okay. Um, that it says, right, now the body is not a single part, but many. If a foot should say, because I'm not a hand, I do not belong to the body, it does not for this reason belong any less to the body. An ear should say, I'm not an eye, I don't belong to the body. It does not for this reason belong any less to the body. And it says, God placed the parts, each one of them, in the body as he intended. If they were all one part, where would the body be? The eye cannot say to the hands, I do not need you, nor again the head to the feet, I do not need you. The parts of the body that seem weaker are all the more necessary, and the parts of the body we consider less honorable, we surround with greater honor. And our less presentable parts we are treated with greater propriety, where our more presentable parts do not need this. But God has so instructed the bodies to give greater honor to a part that is without. So there is no division in the body, but all the parts may have the same concern for one another. And so seeing this in an internal way and watching in that very moment, this is being read. The pastor is speaking about it, meaning it in a totally different way, but I'm having this internal revelation of my parts are at war with each other. And even my pious part, thinking that it's trying to get me to focus, is distracting me and it is causing the anxiety. It is the desire for one of them to get rid of the other that is causing this distraction and turmoil. If we can just honor each other, get along a little bit, then maybe we would have room to greet God, and find, that all parts of us have a certain purpose and God put them there. I don't need to try to cut off a certain part of me.
Yeah. I really love that. And I really love bringing in the body language. I mean, it seems like, yeah, like the physical body becomes a really good analog for the inner world. And
Hmm.
uh, I know for sure Orthodox tradition uses language of passions. I think that comes a lot in Catholicism too.
Hmm.
Um, but we'll talk about not just like, here's your seven deadly sins, but we'll talk about things like, well, there's pride, which you kind of know, but then there's like monastic pride, which we say is like
Oh,
maybe like a little bit better because you're not doing some things, but it's still the sense of like, well, I'm taking pride in my righteousness, or I'm taking pride in my
yeah.
asceticism. I'm better at fasting than you. That's or
Yeah.
that sort of thing. And there's this sense of, there's one of our hymns is like, from my youth my many passions war against me, and it's this imagery that runs throughout a whole bunch of our hymnography and our prayers, is like our inner world, our inner parts, our inner
Mm,
passions, our war against each other, and our war against the spiritual forces. And so
yeah.
the there's this, a couple ideas we would talk about. One is that, um, all desires are meant for God, and we are as humans, we are created with the capacity for infinite desire, and
Mm,
thus can only be satisfied by the infinite. And so
mm,
desires turn anywhere other than God, parts doing anything other than what they're meant to do, which is to turn us toward God, will
yeah.
cause problems.
Mhm.
Um,
Well
and
said.
but yeah, but in Orthodox thought in particular, there's this idea of the inner stillness, of
Mm,
awakening the nous. It's a Greek term for this like inner part that is the part of you that's capable of perceiving God, and it's a part that needs to be awakened.
ah,
And
cool.
yeah, and so that's where like a lot of like Orthodox spiritual practice centers is the calming, is the quieting, is the ordering. uh
Mm,
Kind of the IFS correlate would be the recognizing and unblending from the different parts, again, not
mm,
necessarily to like condemn them or do anything, but to be like, I am not them, I am not my
right.
passions, I'm not my desires. My desires do need to be turned toward God. But as I awaken the nous, awaken the inner stillness, I become aware of God, and
Mm,
able to perceive Him more rightly. And again, if my life is oriented around there, then
mm,
like you're saying earlier, there's this like internal mentality shift that, doesn't change your behaviors like today,
right.
but over months and years of doing this as a practice, absolutely does
You're
heal
right.
and transform you.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so well said. Yeah, and it makes me think like, um, what was the Greek term you said for that inner
The nous.
the nous, right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious, is that your theory of what the self is in IFS language?
I'd love to like talk to a few more seasoned Orthodox people about that.
Yeah.
Because I wonder that too, if they're talking around kind of the same sort of idea.
Yeah.
So I don't feel authorized to say that definitively, but but I would like
Fun
to
to
ask more about it.
theorize.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I read a book, and I should know the author, name of the author in the book, but their language for what the self was this spirit-led self, right? Um, and so I've theorized with folks of like, is it our soul? Is it just the Holy Spirit's presence in us? That because I know we read in Romans 8, I have it right down here of that. Only through the Spirit are we able to pray as we ought. We don't know how to pray as we ought, but the Spirit Himself intercedes for us. And so this is super important to me because, speaking about how do we make this a practice? How do we do this mental shift regularly? There could be this fear of, and I hear it all the time with clients of, is this what God is calling me to? Is this just me talking? And when you're doing this work of going inward and trying to build harmony with your parts, um, that you can encounter these self-like parts that seem really close to self because they're close to God. But how do we, or even sometimes if you're doing some of this inner work, you can, actually experience God leading you through some of this work in your own prayer time. And then it's like, is that God or is that a part of me? And then all of this fear around that, right? And so how do we discern, is this a self-like part or is this me? And so to that I say, right, trust the Spirit. And it's the importance of like, because I've had clients come in and Jesus is calling me to this, right? And I'm like, I can see as third party, I know a part of you has been trying to convince you of this exact thing for so long, and heard a message at church that then solidified, see, do this, system, see, Jesus said so, right? And so this is the importance to me of returning to prayer and questioning, okay, I'm feeling this calling, let me check in on how all of my parts feel about this, you know and just to see if you've got some that are really aligned with the message, some that aren't, to be able, like you said, to get that unblending and experience the Spirit-led self, whatever it is, to know, okay, yes, I can trust that this is not just me twisting Jesus's words to fit my own spiritualized parts desires, but this is a true self to God connection happening that we want to integrate in our system.
In some summary, so as we're talking around this, it sounds like some core concepts. So there's spirituality, there's awakening
Mm-hmm.
the spirit. Then there's also a more of a like a Pharisaical sort of spirituality, or like a
Mm-hmm.
religiosity, or something like that. And uh, spiritually speaking, we might say it's the difference between like a true inner stillness, humility, where like none of the passions can really make me do anything, versus more like I'm being driven by fear. I'm being driven by monastic pride, or being driven by like anger or by judgment or something. And it
Mm-hmm.
might show up very piously, but still have that more like uptight, like
Yeah,
feel.
yeah, yeah.
And clinically, again, within the IFS model, talking, here's different parts. We have our manager parts that keep things together, and our firefighter parts that like react to stuff very bigly, and our exile parts that carry like what feels like an overwhelming amount of pain until we get closer and realize it's just little kids. Um,
Just little kids.
uh, yeah. And then there's the self, the calm, the curious, the compassionate, courageous self. And and kind of what we're teasing out is that there are parts of us that do a lot of things that the self does, and we're saying like the spiritualizer, this very like
Mm-hmm.
spiritual, like pious part, does a lot of like good religious things, but not necessarily from a place of calm, not necessarily
Yeah.
from a place of peace or of courage, and not, it's not necessarily compassion driven as much as like fear driven, or shame driven,
Mm.
or something else, something other than the inner calm.
Yeah.
And it's subtle, because again, our spiritualizer parts look really good. They do a lot of proper things.
Well,
uh
proper.
yeah. I wonder, Mary Kate, what would you say? So for somebody who may be beginning to recognize they have this tendency to be the Pharisee in
Mm.
one of the gospel parables, or to just have a lot of this like kind of controlling internally controlling manager energy.
Mm-hmm.
What would be some suggestions you might offer for further growth?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the very fact that they're starting to recognize, if you are a listener, starting to recognize that voice as something separate from yourself or separate from God, right? That it's its own kind of person in you, being already that um, knocks some of its power over you down a notch so you guys can be equal players here. And you, in the same way that you're wanting to draw near to the parts of you you're ashamed of, just draw near to that one and have that one draw near to Christ. And I would say, and what I love doing is in my own prayer routine, actually bringing a singular part to God that morning. So if you've got a manager part that's really worried that you're not being a good enough Christian these days, your frequency of prayer has gone down, or you're rippled with chronic sin, whatever that loud voice is there, checking in with it and asking the same questions you would ask to any part. What are you afraid of? What are you scared would happen if you stopped, doing this job that you're doing to keep me on the right path? What do you think I would do? Or what is it that is your big intention for me? And so when you start to break down those huge values, and you're allowing Christ into those places with that part, God's going to direct what that part is needing for that day. God's going to help with what intention to have. If that part is just focused on, I just want to make sure that you're remembering to be honing in on this virtue today. Okay. I'm wanting you to be more humble. All right. Okay. Jesus, please provide the opportunities for us to grow in humility today. Please be with us so that this part does not have to do all the job of that or try to think that it's going to mastermind the whole thing, right? So we can trust that God's going to be leading us through. And I think that typically, from me, really soothes it. Okay, wow, I don't have to be so intense about this.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a way. Yeah, stepping away from the intensity again into the calm, and that's where I think a lot of like the change happens. Is like, in order to do any of this requires slowing down, like
Mm,
physically slowing down, turning stuff off. Sitting or standing, or maybe even walking slowly, down a path or something.
mm.
And to do that, you can't be on drugs, you can't be acting out,
Right,
you
yes.
can't be like gluttoning, you can't be adding more chaos into your life. And so there's
Mm,
even getting to this point, there's already got to be some like external, your world's got to shift a little bit, or you've got to be stepping away from your world a little bit, even to get into something like
right.
a prayer rule like this. And then
Mm,
yeah, being able to kind of isolate, here's a part, here's a desire,
mhm.
can I bring it to the Lord, can I say, Lord, have mercy on this part of me. And uh
Yeah.
and I was appreciating in I mean, this came up a lot in our the IFS training that we did. They were talking a lot about, as we get to know parts and help them unburden things,
Mm.
that these parts that used to cause us a lot of trouble can actually become guides and become
Yeah.
messengers. And like, and I was talking a bit about my more sexual desire part that has caused me problems before, and still
Mm.
could. But if I'm in a more like calm, insight driven space, I can recognize, hey, that part's up. I wonder, am I feeling lonely? Do I maybe need to like reach out to
Right.
somebody, or like do I need to like turn around and invest more in my marriage or something? So there's also some ways that I can use that as like, oh, there's things that require legitimate attention, and wow, I'm
Yeah.
appreciating that part for pointing those out.
Sure, yeah.
So
Exactly. That's
yeah,
so well said.
yeah. So uh wow, Mary Kay, I've really loved hearing a lot of your thoughts, and getting a further glimpse into the Catholic tradition and the beautiful offerings from them. Uh, uh,
Totally.
if a listener wanted to reach out to you for conversation or
Mm.
consultation or anything, where are you on the webs?
Wow, yes, a little plug. So I am working at Abundant Life Counseling Services, I think is the full name. And I think if you just look up abundantlifecounseling.com, we're here in Austin, um, doing virtual or in-person sessions for anybody in Texas. So come on down, Google me. I'm here.
Cool, cool, cool. Uh, well, there you have it. That's where you can find Mary Kate, down in Texas. I have never yet been to Texas, but there's parts
Come
of me
on
that would like
down.
to at some point.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
cool. Okay. Well,
It's been such a pleasure, Moses, and what an honor to be able to be a part of this. I'm going to be a total fan following this podcast now. It sounds like such cool, rich information that's out there. So
sweet.
I'm a
Cool.
fan now.
Well, thanks.
You got
Tell
me
your
hooked.
friends. Follow the Patreon.
Woohoo! Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
the Patreon, yes.
Yeah. Cool deal. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here. And thank you, the listener, for following us along. We are on YouTube and on Apple Podcasts now. And yeah, you can visit patreon.com/outer circle, or follow me on my Instagram. It's at New Pattern Counseling, because New Pattern Counseling produces Outer Circle Inner Stillness. I didn't quite organize like a coherent single brand name for all of that, but all of it's me. It's all me. So anyway, well, thank you very much.
Thank you,
And
Moses.
yes, I hope we get to talk again soon.
All right.